Hello again to another Agakala React, and today we'll be watching why it's looking more likely that Iceland will join the EU from TLDR News EU. And I haven't watched anything from them, haven't made a reaction to anything from them in a really long time. And didn't realize I'm sitting like this. Yeah, and it's about the time to watch something new.
This video is brought to you by GiveWell. Over the weekend, Iceland held snap parliamentary elections, which saw the pro-EU Social Democratic Alliance regaining power after more than a decade in opposition. Although Iceland is not a member of the EU, the Social Democrats initiated negotiations to join the bloc during their previous tenure. These talks were suspended when they were ousted from government, but their return to power means that Iceland's accession to the EU is at least more likely than it was. So in this video, we're going to take a look at Iceland's relationship with the EU, the results of last weekend's snap election, and whether joining the EU could be back on the table. Before we start, if you haven't already, please consider subscribing and ringing the bell to stay in the loop when we release new videos. But let's start with some context. For years, Iceland has been deeply integrated with the EU. In the 1970s, the country became part of the European Free Trade Association, the European Economic Area, or EEA, and also signed a bilateral free trade agreement with the bloc. Since then, Iceland has further integrated with the EU by signing up to the Schengen area, the passport-free travel zone, and the Dublin Agreement on asylum policy. During the aftermath of the financial crisis, there was considerable talk as to whether Iceland should push forward and join the EU fully. For some, membership of the EU, and specifically adoption of the euro, was seen as a safe haven, following the near collapse of the Icelandic krona in 2008. So much so, in fact, that in 2009, Iceland, led by the newly elected Social Democratic Alliance, formally began the process of joining the EU. This was at a time when the krona had lost half its value, and when Iceland became the first Western European nation in over 25 years to appeal to the IMF for financial assistance. However, despite 3 years of negotiations, there was a key obstacle that prevented things from going any further: fishing rights. By being a member of the various economic agreements with the EU, Iceland receives basically the same economic benefits as other member states anyways. But more importantly, whilst Iceland is subject to all laws of the single market, it has exemptions for agricultural and fishing matters. Agriculture and fisheries are not covered by the EEA, with the only stipulations focusing on a gradual opening up of trade in those areas, through separate agreements.
It kind of makes sense, but then I didn't realize that. I don't know what to think about it actually. What do we have? 30 seconds. Yeah, I knew that they are in the European Economic Area, EEA, because Switzerland is a very similar situation as well. They are not part of EU, but they are in European Economic Area, is it? And basically that's what happened. I know that because whenever we applying for Eric's permission to stay in Ireland to work and live and stuff, we it's always basically that it's from EU or EEA, meaning Switzerland, Norway, and Iceland. I think there's someone else, I can't remember now who, another country I mean. So that's kind of like stuck in my head that they're not part of EU, but they are, like Switzerland is in part of Schengen as well, so it kind of makes life easier. But why not? Because they should. It's just now how much? Almost there. So what was I saying? Oh yeah. So I kind of knew about that, but I didn't realize that even they wouldn't be like. If they want to be joining the same thing with all the restrictions and stuff like that, they would just join the EU, isn't it?
EU membership would invariably require Iceland to sign up fully to the terms of the Common Agricultural Policy and the Common Fisheries Policy, or CFP, allowing fishermen from across the European Union the right to access and fish in its waters. For a country where fishing occupies such a central place in society and in the economy, for context, the fishing industry employs some 9,000 people, or 5.3% of the workforce, and contributes to an estimated 25% of GDP when indirect effects of the ocean cluster are included. Giving up control of their fisheries would be deeply controversial.
Yeah, it would be
Anyway,
controversial
during
and
these
really
negotiations,
bad
the
for
Social
them.
Democrat government was becoming increasingly unpopular after it introduced a series of austerity measures, and simultaneously, polls were showing that Icelanders' opinions on joining the EU had soured. In 2013, the Social Democrats lost the parliamentary elections to the two centre-right Eurosceptic opposition parties, the Independence Party and the Progressive Party. These two parties subsequently formed a coalition, and with the Social Democrats yet to finish the negotiations before the end of their term, the new government put them on hold. Then, in 2015, without holding a referendum, the government dropped its EU bid, with Iceland's foreign minister writing that Iceland's interests are better served outside the European Union. Iceland's government even sent a formal notice to the EU, requesting that, quote, Iceland should not be regarded as a candidate country for EU membership. Since then, EU membership hasn't really been discussed, and nearly every annual poll has shown that more citizens are against joining the EU than for it. But in the past 2 years, multiple polls have shown that an increasing number of citizens are in favour of joining the EU, or at least want a referendum to be held. For example, a recent poll from June showed that 54.3% of respondents supported Iceland joining the EU, while 74.2% believe it is important to hold a referendum on further EU membership negotiations. Another poll indicated that 66.8% of respondents think households would be better off from EU membership. But what explains this shifting pro-EU sentiment? Well, there's likely a number of reasons, but the way we see it, the main one is increasing economic uncertainty. Whilst Iceland ranks among Europe's wealthiest nations on a per capita basis, inflation and borrowing costs are near their highest levels since the 2008 financial crisis. In fact, after Turkey and Colombia, Iceland has one of the highest inflation rates in the OECD.
And then Poland,
and it's led to
interesting.
a difficult cost of living crisis, which has only been exacerbated by Iceland's vulnerable fishing and tourism-dependent economy. This year, Iceland experienced a significant decline in fish exports, while a series of volcanic eruptions displaced thousands and led to costly infrastructure repairs across the country. Meanwhile, the tourism sector contracted by 1% in the 9 months leading up to September, following an impressive 20% growth in the previous 3 years. Amid these economic concerns then, the debate over joining the EU has resurfaced. Now, we should mention that adopting the euro is a bit of a contentious topic in Iceland, and any Icelandic government negotiating EU membership would probably push for an exemption from the eurozone. But some argue that the euro is a more stable currency than the Icelandic krona, and that could protect the economy from high inflation. Then, in October, escalating public discontent over the cost of living crisis and disagreements over migration and foreign policy within the government, an uncomfortable three-party coalition established between the centre-right Independence Party, the Agrarian Liberal Progress Party, and the left-green movement, finally bubbled over. With the government's approval rating at a record low, Prime Minister Bjarni Benediktsson dissolved Parliament and called for snap elections, which happened over the weekend. According to initial results, the Social Democratic Alliance, which began EU accession talks more than a decade ago, secured about 21% of the vote. The incumbent Conservative Independence Party followed closely with 19%, while the centrist pro-EU Liberal Reform Party garnered 16% of the vote. The Social Democrat leader, Kristrún Frostadóttir, will now try to seek coalition partners, likely with the Reform Party, to command a parliamentary majority. If coalition talks do go this way, an EU referendum could be very much back on the table. Back in 2022, these parties requested the centre-right government for an EU referendum and created a draft bill a year later. But whilst these parties may be keen to hold an EU referendum, especially Reform, which splintered from the former ruling Independence Party for its pro-EU stance, the current leader of the Social Democrats has stated that holding a referendum may be premature. Frostadóttir argues that it could cause division in the country, where even though pro-EU sentiment has been on the slight rise recently, the general consensus on joining the bloc still seems to be very much 50-50. Now, when you make a big purchase, say a car or a new mattress, how do you make sure that you're making the right choice? You could rely on all of the marketing copy in the product's ads, but many people find they need an independent resource that's rigorous and trustworthy. Today's sponsor, GiveWell, provides that independent resource for a different kind of purchase, a donation. For over 15 years, GiveWell has been researching charitable organizations and only directs funding to a few of the highest impact opportunities that they've found. That's things like bed nets to prevent malaria. It costs about $5 to provide one net. Nets can reduce the number of malaria infections, and enough nets and a large enough drop in infections can save a life in expectation. Together, over 100,000 donors have used GiveWell to donate more than $1 billion. Rigorous evidence suggests that these donations will save over 150,000 lives and improve the lives of millions more. GiveWell wants as many donors as possible to make informed decisions about high-impact giving. You can find all of their research and recommendations on their site for free. You can make tax-deductible donations to their recommended funds or charities, and GiveWell doesn't take a cut. I particularly like GiveWell as it ensures that your money is doing the most it can to help those the most in need. Here at TLDR, we're big believers in doing research to find out what's really going on, and that's exactly the approach that GiveWell takes to charities. If you've never donated to GiveWell's recommended charities before, you can have your donation matched up to $100 before the end of the year, or as long as matching funds last. To claim your match, go to givewell.org and pick YouTube and enter TLDR News at checkout. Make sure they know that you heard about GiveWell from TLDR News to get your donation matched. Again, that's givewell.org to donate or find out more.
That was kind of cool too. The GiveWell thing, is kind of interesting too. And yeah, but will Iceland join EU? I think that eventually it will, but that will be more like in years, like decades to come, because they have to kind of like, you know. Or maybe not, maybe I'm mistaken and they're actually gonna happen soon, but it's just like they haven't really joined in already since the beginning, so why would they rush to it now? I don't see a point for it. Like they're parts of the EU, EEA and other stuff, so they're kind of like on a good thing, but it, obviously they're gonna have to, you're gonna look on the how the future looks and stuff like that. So maybe someday. Nah, thank you very much for watching and I see you tomorrow. Bye!